Good morning, everyone. It is Saturday, April 2nd here in the East Coast. I'm here in New York City, and we are so happy to welcome you back to the EdCollab gathering. This is now our, I want to say, 17th-ish, somewhere in there, gathering. It's hard to believe that we've come this far, that we've had so many with you, but we're so glad to have you join us here once again for this amazing day. First of all, before we jump all the way into our news for the day and to help you work through today if you haven't, first a special Ramadan Kareem to our celebrating Edu friends as Ramadan is just starting around the world. So Ramadan Kareem to you. Hope you have a meaningful fast. So if this is your first time joining an EdCollab gathering, or maybe you've been here every single time since we've started, welcome or welcome back. Here's a few tips on how the day will run. So the best place to watch the gathering is right from the gathering's website. That's likely where many of you are right now, but some of you might be joining from our YouTube page, or maybe you're on Twitter, also watching this live stream. If you are not on our gathering page, you can go to our website, gathering.theeducatorcollaborative.com. Oop, there it is. And the way that you'll navigate today is like this. So on the page, there's an agenda link that you can click to see all of the sessions, or you can click through to each one of the individual sessions where there are a bunch of workshops listed. So for example, if you want to join Stella and Joellen when their session 1 workshop begins, you'll just click on session 1. You see that drop down right there. You'll choose theirs. Then on the page, just like this one as well, you will see a video posted in the center. That video will automatically start. It'll kind of do a fancy countdown just before the workshop begins. It'll automatically start on time if you're following along with today's gathering live. You may have to click the play button in the middle of the screen to get it to pop up, depending on your browser. But once you click there, it'll let you know when it's about to start, and it should start right on time. One tip throughout today, if anything doesn't seem to be working at any point at all, which it's the internet, things sometimes don't work, our best advice is to refresh your page, and also to hop over to Twitter, look at the EdCollab, that's our Twitter page. There we'll give any updates. So for example, once in a while, a video hasn't quite come up correctly, a link is broken, something doesn't quite work, but we have an amazing volunteer tech team behind the scenes that try to get everything up and going. So if anything doesn't seem quite right, first refresh. If that doesn't work, hop over to Twitter and we'll send updates there. But usually we fix whatever the issue might be just in a few minutes. Once you're on the page and you're watching, one thing we'd suggest you do, and another reason why it's good to go right to our website, is underneath each session, we list the presenters' bios. And most importantly, we'd like to direct your attention to their Twitter handles. So underneath all of the presenters' videos, we try to have their Twitter handle or some other way that you can contact them. The beauty of the EdCollab gathering, even before all of us had to be on Zoom and Meet and every other online version of teaching that we've been engaged in the last few years, the gathering has existed online since the start. So for years, we've always been online. One thing that's wonderful about that is that we have folks joining us from literally all over the world. Hi, everyone. From wherever you are, you're able to join us right now. The only downside of that is that you're not able to have those great right after a workshop, off to the side or in the hallway conversations where, for example, if you joined Joellen and Stella, you could say, that session was so great. Can I get your email? That session was so great. What do you think about this book? That session was so great. I need recommendations for. You're not able to engage in the way that you would in person. And so we'd suggest, and in fact, we'd encourage you that throughout today, if you are inspired by what you're learning, if you feel intrigued to understand more, if you'd like to connect with the presenters, we'd encourage you, please go to the page, find their social media or other ways to contact them and reach out to them. If you love stuff so much that you'd like to share what you're thinking, you could tag the presenters and then also consider tagging us at the EdCollab, and definitely use hashtag the EdCollab gathering. And then we also will help to retweet and share your messages of thanks or the things that you're learning. So that's one. If you're watching us today, you can find us on the page. You also can follow our Twitter handle, and there we'll have links throughout the day that can update you. Press play if you need to, and please, please shout out the presenters and reach out to them during their sessions. Another thing that makes the EdCollab gathering unique is that it is absolutely completely free. No one had to register for today. Some of you may have just stumbled upon it now, but right now you're watching a gift from us at the EdCollab and from all of the presenters that are sharing today. Everything is free, no registration, we're all volunteer. So what we ask is you consider, what would you normally spend on perhaps registration to go to a great conference day like today? Or what might you normally spend if you were buying a cup of coffee in the hallway between sessions, or if you were going to lunch with friends in the middle of the day? Think about what you might normally spend on a great conference like today. And we hope that you'll consider paying the joy forward. Every gathering, we ask our keynotes, our opening and closing keynotes, to adopt some charities for us. And those charities are ones that we ask you, if at any point during the day you feel like, wow, that was so great, you take that joy and you pay it forward. So today's charities are Plan International, Hope in a Box, and We Need Diverse Books. At that point today, when you feel so inspired, you can either click on any of those charity logos off to the left side of your screen, or there's a link on the top that says Adopted Charities. Both of those will take you to our Adopted Charities page. There, you can read about how LeUyen chose Plan International, or how our closing sessions chose Hope in a Box and We Need Diverse Books. When you go to that page, you'll be able to read about the charities. There also is a link to donate directly to them. So you don't make any donation to us, you go directly to their website page. There you can review the charity, and there you can make your donations. You don't only have to donate to these charities, though they're the ones that we're adopting for today. But what we suggest to you, because this day is a free day of learning, a free day of education joy, a free day of literacy love, if at any point you feel inspired, we encourage you to, whether through these charities or some other way, pay the joy forward. That might be to another charity of your choice, that might be volunteerism that you do, or that might just be sharing some of the insights and ideas that you had today with others. But please do consider, how could you pay what you feel and experience today forward to others? And please learn more about Plan International, Hope in a Box, and We Need Diverse Books through those links. The Educator Collaborative, I'm the founding director, and our organization hosts this gathering twice every year, every September and every April. You can learn more about our education. You can learn more about our organization, the Educator Collaborative, directly at our website. We do lots of things, including in-school and remote professional development, lots of learning. There's lots of free resources, many things that you can gather from us there. So before we move over to our opening keynote, I just would like to start with a few thoughts this morning. First, for many of us, maybe possibly all of us, this year has felt like the hardest year of this pandemic yet. There are so many things that appear to be improving. Vaccination rates continue to increase. Schools are finding ways to reopen as safely as possible. More kids are back into classrooms. There are many things that are happening that seem to indicate we're maybe moving forward, that things are improving. We aren't back to those initial dark days where the world, we all felt like we were taken by surprise. But despite that, this year has felt so hard for so many of us. It's felt draining when we're live in school, but we have to shut down or reopen again, or everyone's in masks, or during the Omicron surge, so many kids and teachers got sick, kids were in auditoriums, teachers were covering multiple classes. It feels difficult and challenging because we feel like the lessons that we've learned should feel better and different now. It feels different and challenging because where we once were heroes, now educators, in schools are headlines. I remember back when we were banging on pots, right, outside of our doors to thank medical staff and first responders and educators for all that they were doing to try to keep our world together. And now there's been what feels like this shift, this change in the way that so many professions, nurses, doctors, those of us in education, the ways that our profession is being talked about and thought about. We were heroes and we were held up, and now there are so many headlines about the things that we're apparently doing wrong. Right now, there are more workers in California, for example, who are striking for their safety. There's educators who are trying to make the way that kids teach and learn better. Right now, there are book challenges sweeping the nation where there's questions of whose identities are allowed in classrooms. Right now, there are curriculum challenges where our schools indoctrinating our children. We've gone from being celebrated and being thanked to what feels like so much of our profession has just become a negative headline, a question mark, an angry yelling at a board meeting. And what I'd like to think about this morning is, first of all, that headlines can sometimes overshadow the work that's actually going on. Yes, things are not good. There are a lot of districts, colleagues and friends of mine who we've cried together because of the ways that things have what felt like seismically shifted in one board meeting or shifted in one conversation with an administrator. But it doesn't mean that just because there's a headline, that there aren't people that are also working hard in their purpose. So what I'd like to remind you this morning, and the way I'd like to invite you to think about all of today's amazing sessions, is don't let politics diminish your purpose. Walk in what you know to be true. Find the people that you need to stand with, shoulder to shoulder, arm to arm, that can be there with you. Because yes, there are shifts that are challenging our deeply held beliefs, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't hold those beliefs. It doesn't mean that you should let them go. So for example, if you have a deeply held belief that children should have choices about what they read, and that independent choice reading is a key to your instruction, and if people are telling you otherwise, find the folks that you can be in community with that believe the same thing, nurture that passion that you have, and find the ways that people around you can support that vision. And sometimes maybe in your context, in your school, in your classroom, you alone can't do it, but there's a world of folks around you that can do it too. Yesterday, last 24 hours, there's one major library company that works on library software. You can look them up online. And they had announced plans that they were going to create a system for schools that schools could opt into. It was opt-in only, but they were going to create a system for schools where parents could not only track what books their kids have checked out of the library, but parents could also say, I don't want my kids to read books with gay characters. And the library system in the school, in the library, the system that they proposed would block that child from being able to check out any books with gay characters or Black characters or Pacific Islander or whatever a parent felt like wasn't right for their kids, they could block within a school's library system. And in less than 24 hours, brave, badass librarians, because that's what so many of you are, wrote to that company, spoke to their reps, went online and said, no, that's not what we believe as a community. As library media specialists, we know that's not okay. And what happened is in less than 24 hours, that company retracted every decision that they had made and said, we're sorry, we were going to do this, now we're not. Because there was a community that said, we're going to stand shoulder to shoulder together and we won't let this happen. So don't let politics diminish your purpose. If you believe, like Mike Corrado reminded us during a previous keynote, if you believe that transgender people, transgender children, transgender adults, have a right to live their beautiful, free lives in the ways that they want to, then one thing Mike reminded us is you can nurture that feeling by not just holding it inside of you, but he gave us this really, I've held on to this, he gave us this really, really clear, purposeful direction. He said, one thing you can do is don't just think about it, use the words transgender or gay or queer or lesbian. Use the words in your daily vocabulary every day. If it's not a part of your natural vocabulary already, say the word transgender. Find a way every day, every single day, to bring it into your vocabulary and talk about it with folks around you, and make the language not just more comfortable and normal for you, but comfortable and normal for the folks around you. Nurture that passion. If it's your purpose, stay with it. Don't just think about, but talk about and read about and learn about the struggles and beauty of Black lives, of Asian and Pacific Islanders. Don't just hold on to that purpose. It needs to be nurtured, because there are forces that don't want your purpose to exist. There are forces that don't want your belief to thrive, that don't want you to be able to do what you know is right for children. But that doesn't mean your purpose can't continue. So today, while you're listening to our speakers, consider ways that you can nurture and grow your purpose and continue to live bravely in it. Make it undeniable. So it's with great pleasure that I get to introduce to you today LeUyen Pham. I have a personal joy in which I can say, number one, I have loved and carried around, and I had to pull the sticky notes out so it wouldn't look too funky, but LeUyen's book, Outside Inside, that is a gorgeous, tear-worthy, hope-filled, honest, beautiful picture book that kind of encapsulates what a lot of the pandemic lockdown feelings have been. I have walked with this book, LeUyen, from school to school to school, shared it with so many educators who've made it a part of their classrooms too. I absolutely love this book, and thank you for it. I also want to say that I put up on screen here many of her tons and tons and tons on LeUyen's website. She says, yes, I've published millions and millions of copies of books. There's millions and millions of books in print. Real Friends, right there on the screen with Shannon Hale. Real Friends is literally one of the books that made my daughter a reader. It was graphic novels that took her from a kid who didn't really love books or school, wasn't so into it. And that was one of the books that late at night, the light would be on and she'd have it in her lap. And I can't thank you enough for the gift that you gave our family and the gift that you give all readers through all of your books, giving them windows and mirrors and ways into reading lives for themselves. That truly was one of the ladders for her. And thank you for that. Before I pass it over, you can find LeUyen's work on her website, LeUyenPham.com. You can also find her on Instagram. I love your handle, Win, Lose, or Draw. Her site has, what I love about her site is it's really written for all readers. A kid can go on her site and learn about her in a very welcoming, kid-friendly way. So you can find her bazillions of books. There's also contacts, ways that you can invite LeUyen to your school to present with your students or to your conference. As you're listening today, please do tweet along. You also can tag her over on Instagram. She says she's sometimes on Facebook as well too. And if you're inspired by this morning's keynote, please do give to the charity that LeUyen has adopted for us, Plan International. And so without further ado, it is my great pleasure, and thank you for being with us here today, to introduce LeUyen Pham.
Oh boy. That was such a lovely intro, Chris. I'm a little overwhelmed right now, and it's so early in the morning for me that everything is going to cause me to cry. So I just started. Don't do this to me yet.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for having me here. I anticipated that it was going to be early enough in the morning that I needed to write a speech. So you're going to have to forgive me because I'm going to be reading, because I just can't be trusted to be clever and witty this early in the morning when the sun hasn't yet come out. And I'm in California, everyone. So, so those are my apologies before I even get started. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen because, yes, as an artist, I completely rely on my visuals to get anything going here. And once again, I apologize in advance for reading this aloud. So I have to start off by saying that I've always been a bit flummoxed by being asked to speak to professionals, to teachers, educators, such as yourselves. The imposter syndrome never hits home harder than when you're standing behind a microphone or a podium, or in this case, a Zoom camera, in front of so many talented and educated, incredible educators, and wondering what in God's name I can tell you to hold your attention for so long. If I could, I would swap out my speech for a painting and just let you watch me create a piece from start to finish. It might actually be more telling to you of who I am as a person, to be honest, but what do I have to tell you that could help you with your everyday task of teaching and of educating? In cases such as this, I realize that the far more interesting part of me lies not in the person you see before you now, but in the little girl somewhere still deep inside. Most book creators have that connection still to that inner kid in them. Truth be told, we are simply adults who never fully grew up, who still perceive the world in some way, the same way as they did as children. Only now we have the vocabulary to voice those vulnerabilities better, to help you better understand that quiet kid in the corner that didn't speak but spends hours reading, a kid that maybe nobody likes, but who fills sketchbooks with their never seen drawings. A kid that hasn't yet found their people, that are still vulnerable and searching, the ones that could go one way or another. We are the grown versions of the children you're trying so hard to reach. It's really no coincidence that so many of us have stories of feeling like outsiders when we were young. And in that vein, I have a lot of stories I can tell you. I was born during a war in Vietnam, which would be amazing if I didn't consider it kind of boring myself. My mother would relate stories of bombs falling nearby when she gave birth, but these were told with the same degree of intrigue expressed when she would tell me stories of her pet chicken or her secret recipe for egg rolls. I viewed all of these stories with the same eye, so immune to the drama of the words that have played out so many times as to seem devoid of any real meaning. Coming to the United States as a refugee likewise seemed unremarkable to me. We simply had to leave our country, and so we did. We would be permanent foreigners for as long as we stayed here, so my parents told me. Americans will never see you as one of them, my father said, after he'd gotten his naturalization certificate. A piece of paper doesn't mean they'll accept you. I didn't want to believe that as a kid. For adults past a certain age, I could see that, but the kids in my class certainly couldn't see me always as a foreigner. This was one of those truths I believed, that my parents made real by believing it to be so, not because it was so. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, somehow safe in the knowledge that my perfect English and awareness of pop culture would guarantee me the status of being an American, which is why I've been so frustrated these past few years to discover that my parents were at least partly right. Lately, the rhetoric in the United States has been so harsh and divisive as to make me feel, once again, not that I'm a foreigner here, but that people perceive me as a foreigner. In ever so subtle ways, I can feel my years of being an American slipping into years of pretending to be an American. For the last few years, I felt as though the color of my skin, the shape of my face, my name makes people ask right away, where are you from? And when I respond with, I'm from here, the follow-up is always, no, where are you really from? As though the answer to that question would supply them with anything that they would need to know about me. As though the fact that I came at the age of 2 and can only remember a life in America, all 46 years of those amounted to nothing in today's world. As though my skin color was my only defining trait of value. And not only that, but I've actually felt it myself, that sudden feeling of stepping into a room and realizing I'm the only person of color here, and suddenly feeling a bit anxious. And I'm mixed. I'm not even fully Vietnamese. I've never felt comfortable walking into a room full of Vietnamese people either. I sometimes feel like I don't quite belong anywhere. That is why I do children's books. My drawings can be anywhere and belong everywhere. People who look at my drawings see straight into my head first, straight into my thoughts and memories. And this is what I try to remember when the world turns bleak. I return to my childhood. I return to remembering how I found a life in books, because that's how I've always entered the world. I've always entered through books. And I'll bet most of you are the same. So I'm going to tell you these as a series of little stories. The horror. If there was one book that scared the bejesus out of me as a kid, it was Where the Wild Things Are. It was likely due to awful timing, but I was shown the book just after having watched Apocalypse Now. I was about 9 years old. Yeah, you heard right. My father, a complex man who never shared much, greatly enjoyed watching war movies with his 5 young children. He wanted us to know what had happened in Vietnam, but he didn't want to relate his own personal experiences. So what better way than war movies? Any war movie would do. I think I was the only kid in my second grade class who sat through the entire 13 hours of Vietnam, the 10,000 Day War, a mercilessly long documentary with, as I recall, the most monotonous narrator ever given to film. So when Apocalypse Now showed on TV in 1983, all 5 of my father's children were on hand to watch it. I've blocked most of the movie from memory, but for whatever reason, at the age of 9, when I saw the spread in Where the Wild Things Are of the wild rumpus, I kept picturing the cow scene from Apocalypse Now. The jungle, the dancing, the horns of animals, the lost soul on his own with beasts for friends. Correct me if I'm wrong, but am I not describing Captain Benjamin Willard's foray into the heart of darkness? Add a machete and you're done. The image in that book will always be to me a hazy and panicked image of Vietnam. So it was really no wonder as a kid that I was a little scared of Max and his wild rumpus pals. I remember the librarian who had shown me the book being puzzled by my aversion to it. I was too old for picture books at that point, but she'd shown it to me thinking that I would like the art. I remember clearly her seeming rather hurt, offended that I didn't relate with a book that meant so much to her. But if she could only see what I saw, that the book, while meant to be the ultimate in child empowerment, was to me instead a story of a little boy lost in a very real jungle, alone, an ocean away from family. It wasn't the first time that a teacher or librarian in my life offered up a book that I couldn't relate to. It's a tough job to come up with a book that a little immigrant girl might like, especially during the 70s, early 80s, where the best offerings came through Betsy and Billy, Ginny and Geneva, and finally the early Ramona books. The experiences I understood in my life had little to do with the experiences of some of these plucky little heroines who always had 2 parents at home, a dog, a cat, and a grandmother with blue hair. But I read them anyway, and while I did ultimately end up appreciating the story, I was always parsing through the book for more information about this world I was now growing up in, a world I felt I was experiencing mostly as an outsider. While we lived in what was typically a suburban Southern California neighborhood, within our walls, it was still Vietnam. One of the things about being Vietnamese that always proved wearisome to me was in the hazy era of the Reagan administration, whenever I met an adult over the age of 30, all they wanted to know was what it was like to be in Vietnam during the war, which of course I didn't know as I was only 2 when we left. In our town, there were very few other Vietnamese, so the only thing I knew about my culture was what my parents showed us at home. And given that they had 5 kids to raise, full-time jobs, and limited means, they didn't devote much time or energy to explaining the why of it all. But I still had my questions. Why is saving face so important? Why is it rude to show the bottom of your feet to someone older than you? Why can't we eat the food in front of the shrine of our ancestors, especially if we're hungry? There were many puzzling aspects to my Vietnamese life that I couldn't answer. And while I was pretty confused by the world within our wall, I was even more perplexed by the world outside. I knew nothing of the Western life that all of our friendly American neighbors seemed to come from. Americans drank copious amounts of milk, ate exotic dishes like mashed potatoes and macaroni, and sometimes left food on their plates. Some kids would make fun of my ignorance. They'd laugh at my naive questions about the uses of ketchup and what yogurt tasted like. Adults would piteously shake their heads and quietly pass judgment on my parents when I asked about how to use hair conditioner. Through our TV, we could see how this Western society lived, But TV was confusing, a reflection of the world around me without any further explanation as to what things were, how people actually thought. You can't show internal dialogue on TV. You can only find that in books. Books, in their unbiased and bare form, could let me into the secret thoughts of Westerners. Books were my way in. And I have to say that while all these important conversations are going on about diversity in children's literature and promoting stories of people of color, I don't feel like I missed out that much as a kid. And for that, I have to thank the many teachers and librarians in my life responsible for helping me find good stories. The best suggestion always came from those adults who really knew who I was, not just based on the color of my skin, but on the kid I was inside. My fourth grade teacher knew I needed a role model I could relate to, someone who felt foreign and out of place. I can't imagine my childhood without The Witch of Blackbird Pond as a result. My school librarian didn't offer me the Weston game because she thought I'd connect with the Asian Madam Who or Doug Who. She gave it to me because she knew I loved puzzles, and also that I had an older sister who seemed always to outshine me. That would have been, in short, I was never handed a book about an Asian girl just because I was an Asian girl. That would have been doing a disservice to both the book and to me. Those teachers and librarians did their best to help me find the best of me. And whether the influence came cloaked in the dress of a pioneer girl, an orphaned boy, or a runaway slave, what mattered was the value those characters found within themselves. Which for me, as a young girl struggling with her own cultural and personal identity, was exactly what I needed. Dancing Queen. It's impossible to grow up in the United States in the 80s and not have read a book by Beverly Cleary. Beezus Ramona, Henry Higgins, Ribsy, The Mouse and the Motorcycle. I identified with all of these protagonists, whether they were male or female, human or animal. And even I knew, reading those earlier books about the goings-on in Klickitat Street, that this world was a bygone time. The romantic version of the United States that preceded even the Brady Bunch era, when milk was still delivered to your door and Zwieback crackers were common, and entire books could revolve around paper routes and life in Oregon and how much you wanted your kindergarten teacher to love you. I wasn't familiar with any of these things except through the filter of Beverly Cleary, and they enchanted me. There was one book, though, that stood out in the Cleary pantheon. How many of you guys remember Ellen Tibbetts, that insecure third grader who danced ballet, loved her best friend Austin, and was tormented by Otis Spofford? But the reason I attached to her so well was because of something I had interpreted in a completely different way as a kid and didn't realize my mistake until I started illustrating a book about ballet in my 30s. In the very first chapter of the book, Ellen is going to ballet class and is forced by her mother to wear woolen underwear, much to her mortification. Her struggles with trying to hide it is what creates the bond between herself and her new friend, Austin. It was funny and embarrassing and so Beverly Cleary. But I had no idea what woolen underwear was. I was raised in California where woolen anything didn't exist. So I didn't get the joke as it was meant to be, as it was meant to be. But it was still funny to me because in my head, I replaced the words woolen underwear with hot pink disco skate skirt, and that served the same purpose. It's a leap, but let me explain. My father was a complicated man, and nothing about him was more complicated than his relationship with his adopted country, America. He was forever telling us that we must never forget that we were Vietnamese. That meant respecting your parents always and never arguing with your elders. That meant that we weren't soft people, goddammit. We could hide in the jungle forever, live in tiny tunnels, survive in grubs if we had to. And then in the same breath, he'd say, don't dress so sloppy. We're lucky to be here in this amazing land, and we have to take advantage of it. And then again, stop being so American. You're Vietnamese. To say he was sending mixed messages is an understatement. I think he was confused himself. So while he was adamant that his kids take martial arts and eat Vietnamese food, he was also equally zealous about us signing up to do the most American things we could. Soccer, Girl Scouts for my sister, and for me, ballet. When I was 8, my father dragged me to a ballet class. I was a relentlessly shy kid and loathed meeting new kids who would always assess my looks before assessing me. And rarely was there the progressor kid in the 80s who could see past my donated clothes and oily hair to discover that I was a lovely person. I was sure that anybody who first met me didn't like me. Ballet class only affirmed my belief in the worst of people. Just imagine a room with a length of mirrors on the one end and a long bar attached. And in front of the bar, a line of about 12 little girls in perfect pink leotards and shiny satin black ballet shoes, their hair done back away from their pink faces, all dreaming their dreams of dance. And then imagine me at the end of the line wearing gym shorts, an oversized t-shirt, gym socks. Yeah, gym socks, the ones that go over your knees, with my hair draped over my face and my feverish attempts at hiding myself. Nobody talked to me. Nobody stood near me. Nobody came up to welcome me to the class. A couple of the ones with tight buns and hints of lip gloss even sneered at me and said loudly that something smelled funny. Misery had never been so palpable. Kids can really be the worst sometimes. The teacher was terribly sympathetic. She came up to me several times and patted me on the back. She said that to be a dancer, you just had to believe. She told me I had the most graceful hand motions she'd ever seen. As always, I loved my teachers. When my father picked me up, I left the room as quickly as I could, and I made a very bold request of my dad. If you remember, as children, we never asked our parents for anything. Vietnamese don't ask for things. They're grateful for what they have. But this time, oh, brother, I had to have this. Dad, I said, you have to get me a leotard. Before he could launch into a standard speech, I made my appeal. Dancing is like a sport. You need the right equipment. I need a leotard so I can move. You got my brother's a karate outfit. This was like a karate outfit. As always, my father tried to mold the needs of my world into the familiar elements of his own world. You want a karate outfit? He asked. A leotard, Dad. Something pink and fits you tight and lets you be graceful. My dad looked unconvinced. I decided to expose the vulnerable part of my heart. Dad, I said in a very small voice, I needed to make friends. I want to believe that my request softened him. I keep molding my memories of that moment to show my dad as though he saw the light, as though he truly wanted to help his struggling daughter. But I know now that what was really going through his head was, what in the world is a leotard? And of course, being a Vietnamese man, he couldn't ask this question of his young daughter. That next week, before ballet class started, my father came to me with a department store box. He handed it to me without much ceremony, informed me that it cost $20 and that I would have to wear it until it was threadbare, and left me trembling with the box in my hands. I opened it carefully. Through the tissue, I saw the glint of something pink. Leotard, I thought whispered in my head. I pulled back the tissue. The material was shiny, a little too shiny. It was pink, but a little too pink, like hot pink. I slowly lifted it out of the box and stared straight onto it fully for the first time. It was sort of a leotard. It was a disco skating outfit. It was pink, that was for sure, with disco stripes cutting across the skirt portion in a daring diagonal, and emblazoned across the front without a hint of apology was the head of E.T., the extraterrestrial. You know, the one from the movie. His finger had been cropped in, glowing a garish orange against the pink, and underneath were the words, "Be my friend." As an adult, looking back on this whole thing with the wisdom of hindsight and a crude humor only time can grant you, I can see where I made my mistake in describing what I wanted from my dad. I mean, it was pink. It fit tight. The shiny synthetic material would give my movements an artificial grace. And my dad was clearly trying to help me find a way to make friends. I stayed in the class for a year. I never made a single friend. I learned all the positions and danced well at the bar and eventually tied my hair back so I could see better. I told myself that Ellen Tibbetts had endured this, wearing not a woolen underwear, but an ET tutu, and she survived. My teacher stayed kind and encouraged me to go to the dance recitals, but I could never afford the costumes. Years later, I received a manuscript intended to be an instruction manual to vampires who wanted to be ballerinas. Don't bite your fellow dancers, take night classes, that sort of thing. But that's not what I saw. What I saw was the story of a young vampire with the help of her family who becomes a ballerina. And that's how we sold it and changed the title to Vampirina Ballerina. If you have this book in your library, just realize that you can replace the word vampire with Vietnamese, and the story reads the same. I understood the struggle of fitting in and remembering the little girl I was, maybe not a vampire, but definitely an outsider. I threw that little girl into this book and drew in the happy ending I'd wished for myself, complete with cool costumes and a dance recital. No ET, though. I couldn't get the copyright, at least not in America. A Pox on the Village. My favorite teacher of all time is Miss Sangren, my fourth grade English teacher. This woman read more books to us than any teacher ever had before, all in that sweet southern lilt of hers. She took particular interest in me and my insatiable appetite for books. I'm not sure why she singled me out the way she did, but I was grateful for it. She gave me a new book nearly every week and encouraged me to read them on my own at home. She was the first of many teachers I considered to be a kindred spirit. Miss Sangren was the teacher who gave me The Witch of Blackbird Pond, a book I absolutely cherish. I think you'll relate to the main heroine, kid, she said. Remember, you're a tropical flower in a world of daisies and roses, and that's a good thing. I devoured the book, and I simply loved Kit, an outsider struggling to make her way in the world. She was my 17th century equivalent, the first character I'd ever read that had an experience even close to my own. And on top of all that, she was a possible witch to boot. This book holds another distinction in my life. It could be the reason why my parents weren't arrested for child abuse. This sounds dramatic, and it really shouldn't, because this is a story of a comedy of errors, and it all starts because of a cold. If you grew up in my house, you knew that being sick was not an option. Having a cold would never excuse you from chores or school. A cough was just something you got yelled at not to do too much, and a sore throat could be remedied by drinking some hot water and staying very quiet. Short of coughing up a lung or bleeding from the ears, being ill was something you dealt with on your own. On the occasion a cough or a cold would get worse, my mother would resort to her standard method of treatment, something known in Vietnamese as gao ya. If you've never heard of it, brace yourselves. Gao ya involves the use of the Vietnamese panacea tiger balm and some sort of dull-edged object like a spoon, or my mother's go-to choice, a quarter. My mother would sit me on the edge of the bed with my shirtless back toward her. She would then dab this tiny green bottle that smelled of camphor and eucalyptus leaves down my back, following the direction of my spine and expanding out in the direction of my ribs. This balm always feels warm going on and produces a lot of heat on contact. She would then take a quarter and scrape against my skin repeatedly along the pattern she had drawn with the balm. Yeah, that's right, scrape. This would, of course, leave dark red abrasions just on the skin's surface, and these welts would last for days. Sometimes she would make the same marks on the sides of my neck, particularly if my throat was sore. To answer your unspoken question, yes, it hurt. How could it not? But after the initial first few scrapes, my body would kind of relax into it. After a while, the pain would just turn dull, except around the neck, of course. That never felt good. But I have to admit, it worked. My mother would never explain why or how it worked, except to say that she had to draw all the bad things out of my body onto the surface of my skin to send it out and leave me healthy. Whatever it was, I usually did feel better after a session, even if my back looked like a red Christmas tree. The biggest problem with this treatment for us kids, however, wasn't the application of it, but the hiding of the results afterwards. Amongst Vietnamese society, these telltale red marks would elicit little more than a sidelong glance and an observance that this person had recently had a cold. In America, though, these red welts meant something different altogether. I remember coming to school following a weekend application of Gao Ya. I was dressed up in a turtleneck, slunk down low at my desk, trying to keep awake, when Miss Sangren, who must have been behind me, came right up and tugged at my neckline. She uttered a shrill gasp, causing all the kids in the class to look up. To see her huge brown eyes filled with such alarm over my red welts was very unsettling. She pulled me to the corner away from the other kids and asked me in a hushed, urgent tone, was I hurt? What had happened to me? Did I need to see the nurse? I didn't know how to explain it to her. And I know I blew it big time when I told her, it's okay. My mother had done it to me because I had a cold. It's not a big deal. She's done it lots of times before. It's good for me, really. And the bruises will go away in just a few days. You can imagine how everything I said, while absolutely the truth, got taken completely the wrong way. So I made one last attempt to explain. Remember Witch of Blackbird Pond? When everyone came down with a sickness no one could explain, Mercy nearly died, and a doctor came to bleed her? I didn't know what it was. And you told me it was something people used to do to make you feel better if you were really ill. This is like that, only with no blood. Vietnamese don't like blood. I don't think my explanation convinced her, but for whatever reason, she promised not to say anything. Maybe she realized that I was more of a tropical flower than she'd believed, or maybe she was more of a daisy than even she realized. Thank God she hadn't seen my back. Revenge of the Turtles. Turtle Wexler was a badass. I mean, for real. The first time I read The Westingame, I didn't like her because as the overlooked, funny-looking kid sister, she reminded me too much of me. No real friends except for old people. I was steadily becoming the only kid at Cloverly Elementary whose best friends were her English teacher and her librarian. Bratty to others, like I could be to my brothers. Fiscally minded, I'd already started saving money selling my drawings. Jealous of and yet adoring of her beautiful older sister. My sister was the apple of my parents' eyes. Turtle was the girl no one noticed. She didn't get by on looks, but she got by on smarts. That was a big deal to me. In Vietnamese society, looking attractive, especially for a girl, is a high requirement. Girls were taught to stay indoors so as to not darken their skin, perm their hair from an early age to get that Western look. And usually around the age of 14, they were taught how to put their makeup on. I don't know how many other Asian cultures that ritualize this beautification process as much as the Vietnamese do. In my family, my sister was the loved one. The parallels between my sister and Angela Wexler from the Westingame were indisputable. The oldest child, she was 6 years my senior. She was thin and delicate with fairly pale skin, easy to manage hair, and straight, lovely teeth. She was very pretty naturally and of the kindest disposition most of the time. She never argued with my parents, always trying to please them. Of all the children, she was the one paraded out in front of strangers and made to smile and chat in Vietnamese and English. Such beauty and brains, too. This one was going to be a doctor. I, on the other hand, had proved to be a disappointment. While I'd started out so promising, a pudgy little thing with big Western eyes and chipmunk cheeks, I had slowly started becoming a gawky, funny-looking adolescent with owl glasses that were always broken at the bridge, hair cut in an unflattering straight bang fashion, knees that were always dry and rough, nails that I was always picking at, and worst of all, dark skin that seemed to get darker the older I got. My parents sort of half-heartedly gave up on me ever being a beauty like my sister. When my sister was 15, my mother sat her down for her first makeup treatment. She spent over an hour teaching her how to apply first a base concealer, cover up your freckles best you can, then foundation with sponge applicator only, never use your fingers, following that with a powder. Then eyeshadow, purple will bring out the color of your eyes, eye and brow liner, dark brows will make you look Western, thick liner will make your eyes look big, blush and lipstick. 2 inches of face cake later, my sister would emerge from under my mother's hand looking 25 instead of 15, a porcelain doll. I had watched the whole thing with rapt absorption, unable to look away from the transformation before me. The result was spectacular, but the person before me wasn't my sister. She was someone I didn't know at all. My mother told me that when I turned 15, she would do the same thing for me. She meant it as a way to connect, of course, an act that as a mother and daughter we could share together. But I shook my head ferociously. Never, I said. I could never wear so much makeup. Annoyed, my mother had tisked and said that if I wanted to grow up ugly, that was my business. I looked at my sister, her face a portrait of still loveliness, but totally devoid of emotion. She didn't dare move a muscle on her face for fear of cracking the makeup. It occurs to me that I have never seen my sister without makeup on since that day. I never did learn to put makeup on. Like Turtle, I had to get by on something other than looks. My sister became everything my parents wanted her to be. She grew up beautiful. She went to college, broke men's hearts, became a doctor. Me, I became the artist I was always meant to be. The first book I ever wrote was a book called Big Sister, Little Sister. It is an exact portrait of my sister and I as children. I had written to her as a gift on her 35th birthday. We had taken a trip to Italy together and had just gotten into a fight. I remember being so annoyed at her, my big sister, and sort of tossed the wrapped book at her, saying, "Here, happy birthday already." She crossly opened it, muttering at the same time, "You don't have to give me a present if you're going to be such a brat about it." And as she read the book, her cross look disappeared, and that eager little turtle in me reared up, anxious for my sister to like her present. When she was done reading, she looked at me, her eyes brimming. "You idiot," she said. "Why do you have to be such a good little sister?" And then she cried, which, of course, ruined her makeup. As you can probably tell by now, my childhood greatly affected the decisions I made later as an artist. There is nothing that's not personal in our work. Everything we create is made from the fabric of our everyday lives. In my case, you can actually trace that fabric through all 100 of my books, and I wish I had time to tell you all the stories. I suppose that's part of the reason I make books. Everyone has their version of the world, but for most people, it stays in their head. In the case of a writer, she can describe that world in words, which to me is hard and requires great skill to do because you're limited to just language and only one language at that. I found personally in my own writing that the words I choose can be very weak supports for truth. For an artist, though, language isn't a problem because drawing itself is a language that everyone speaks. I can show you exactly how I see things in my head. No one needs to see my name next to it, to have me standing next to it, beside it, to explain it. People get to see me in here before they can see me out here. Which is why, to me, picture books are really the perfect medium. They're one of the last fields of true, complete artistic expression. When I do books, I strive to tell stories of a world that I want to live in, not necessarily the world as it is. With picture books, we get to give them the hope for the world. I get to make them something beautiful and funny and irreverent and silly. I get to tell the story of the world from the kid's perspective at that moment before the world has a chance to interfere. I get to make the simple truths that I hope will become part of the roots throughout their life. Picture books don't have to be visions of the world that exist. Picture books can be about the world you want to exist. Books are one of the last spheres of permanent influences for how a child can see the world. I know this is the truth because the stories that I read as a child left permanent imprints in me in a way not even my parents could touch. Frog and Toad, Amelia Bedelia, Charlie Bucket, Rikki Tikki Tembo, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, Stone Soup, The Snowy Day, The Giving Tree, all of these greats, these canons of children's literature, some which might not hold up today's stifling accountability, some which hold truths that are so fundamental as to be timeless, all with such breathtakingly beautiful art that my heart yearns for them all still, all which transport me back to an age that I can only remember through these books. To make something like this, to create a volume that permanently resides in a child's mind, is the most we book creators can hope for. I've made so many books with this hope. I know some of them stuck with people, but of all my books, there's been one I've created that wasn't born from my childhood memories. There was one that was made during a very unique time in the world. 2 years ago, almost to the date. Something strange happened on an unremarkable day just before the season changed. Everybody who was outside went inside. I wrote this book at the beginning of what must have been 2 of the longest years we are all living today or may have ever experienced. Can you all even remember the world, what it was like for a short time 2 years ago when we all suddenly went inside? Everyone, everywhere, all over the world. So I'm going to ask you to time travel with me for a second, because I think most of us, having been hardened so long to endless regulations, mandates, medical testing and patients testing, frustration and annoyance and fatigue and downright anger, all of these emotions have filled us up and spilled out and affected so much of our everyday lives. Before there was that, there was this brief moment when the world came together. My family and I experienced lockdown from Los Angeles. This place of bikers and walkers and motorists, this land of no seasons and constant noise, became very, very quiet. Streets were empty. Freeways held no cars. No cars, can you imagine? Air quality was, for the first time in decades, good. There were no planes overhead. Can you even remember that? It's now so commonplace, we forget we even have them, but can you remember the first time you put on a mask? I remember the first time my family did. We were out for a walk and we felt the oddness of the cloth on our face. And I remember the hardest part of the mask was the inability to show a smile. which seemed during that strange time when we stayed far away from everyone in our walks, especially a burdensome handicap. We would see a neighbor down the street and we'd steer far more clear than the required 6-foot distance. But I remember feeling that overwhelming need to show that neighbor that I was happy to see them, that despite the distance and the mask, we were all still connected. And that awful mask covered up your smile. I felt like during that time, I took to waving as wildly and idiotically as I could just to make up for the missing lower half of my face. My youngest hated it most. He was 9 at the start of it all and needed to always be free. How it inhibited his speech, it stifled him, everything about it. Now he's 11 and we have to cajole him every day to lower his mask while walking. He complains that he doesn't feel right without it. Do you remember the early days when the grocery stores had endless empty shelves? We were so fearful of running out of food. Well, what happened to the food, to the farms? Would there still be fruits and vegetables? I remember all the rice and pasta and beans disappearing, how hard it was to buy a bag of flour, and the toilet paper. Seriously, half the homes in the United States must have basements filled to the brim with unused rolls of toilet paper. It's one of those mysteries I haven't yet figured out. And then, almost at the same time, signs began to appear in windows. Do you remember all those sidewalk drawings of rainbows and hearts? Windows adorned with childish scribbles that contained simple yet powerful messages? We're all in this together. Everything will be okay. This too shall pass. I remember seeing one house down the street where an old lady scribbled her grocery list. Neighbors took turns shopping for her so she wouldn't have to leave her home. Do you remember bear hunts? When people started placing teddy bears in the windows so kids could go hunting for them during their walks? In our neighborhood, we counted over 27 bears. Our children were 9 and 11. They were way too old to play with stuffed animals, but the bear hunt became a permanent fixture. We couldn't return home until we counted each one. And then there were the drive-by birthday parties. I remember being so amused by that. A line of cars with balloons or a sign inside, a lone recipient on the sidewalk laughing as a parade would go by in her honor. My own son's 10th birthday party passed in such a fashion. Not a real party, but a real parade. Do you remember that one time of day, every evening, when your neighbors would go to the front doors, usually about 8 o'clock, and grab any object that they could make with noise? Pots, whistles, horns, your simple voice, and we would all cheer wildly, madly into the day to thank doctors and nurses and emergency workers and teachers and all those people who are out there trying to keep us all safe and keep us educated. It was the only time of day when we stepped out without masks. And across the city, wherever you were, you could hear the voices of your own community on their own porches, all of us united in gratitude. It was like evening prayers. And of course, one of the lingering effects of the pandemic, online everything. Schools, meetings, agenda. Zoom has a new meeting. Our screen stood in for real people. The internet became our connection to the world, if you were lucky enough to get it. And of course, after 2 years, it's easy to forget why we did all of this. Because we were trying to keep each other safe. Because doctors and nurses and healthcare workers were putting their lives on the line to keep us alive against this mysterious, deadly virus. And they did it with whatever means they had at their disposal of those times. There was a time when we all remembered that, and we tried to take care of each other. And I just knew that we would forget these early moments. And I needed to record them. That's how I came to write the book, Outside Inside. I started writing down those little things that were happening, recording those moments of human fragility when we all rose to the occasion. I included every aspect I could from every perspective the world had to offer to make sure our history was remembered. I wanted my boys to remember this time when the world came together to do the right thing, when everyone just went inside, shut their doors, and waited. Well, almost everyone. Some people needed to be where they needed to be. Outside, the sky was quiet and the wind still blew and birds kept singing. Raccoons came out and squirrels played in the streets, but the cars stayed away. The world felt a little different. Inside, we baked and cooked, made music and watched TV. We read and played games. Some of us worked a little, some of us worked a lot, and some of us couldn't work at all. We all felt a little different. Outside, there were fences, both real and pretend. Swings sat still and slides were lonely. Bells didn't ring and halls were empty. We had birthdays without parties, shared words without sounds, and reached each other without touching. The world was changing a tiny bit outside. Inside, we waited and we worried. We laughed and we cried and we tried to breathe. We made things together and did things alone. We hoped and prayed and wished. We were all changing a tiny bit inside. Outside, the world kept growing. Inside, we kept growing too. So why did we all go inside? Well, there were lots of reasons, but mostly because everyone knew it was the right thing to do. On the outside, we are all different, but on the inside, we're all the same. And we remembered that soon spring would come inside and outside. Thank you for letting me read that. I actually never get a chance to read it, just to adults. There's a thought that stops me dead each time that makes me catch my breath with an uncontrollable anxiety that I can never rid myself of. What if this had happened to me when I was a kid? And I don't mean figuratively, I mean literally. If I still lived in our 2-bedroom house with my 5 brothers and sisters and 1 computer among us, both of my parents probably not able to work, how would we have been able to go to school? How would we have gotten money to eat? Would our landlord have thrown us out? Would my father, as was his sometimes wont, hit us out of fear and frustration? Would my sister have been able to get her scholarship to school? Would my brothers have been able to keep their after-school jobs? How many years of our lives would be set back by all of this? And the thought that haunts me the most, would I still become an artist? Or would this time in isolation taught me the frailty of our situation in a way that would have kept me from dreaming big dreams in favor of surviving our small lives? I think of this, and each time I think of the people I would have missed most growing up, the ones that held a strong gravitational pull on me I would eventually become. My teachers. To not have access to my teachers would have killed me. My dreams first took hold when my earliest school teachers would tell me, when you're so good at drawing, you could become an artist. An artist, the words used to hold a mythical quality for me until my teachers made me believe that there was something in me that could be made of that same myth. These words would never come from my parents, whose experiences of war and fleeing their country had only left them with life's hard edges and scars too deep to allow for dreaming. The task of future building is the domain of teachers. There are children out there who only get to see what they might become, who get a glimpse of life beyond their own home walls through the influences of their teachers. I know this for certain because in the past couple of years, first watching my own sons struggling to connect through the computer screen with their own teachers, and then visiting classrooms virtually to read outside and inside to them, I've been privy firsthand to the effects teachers have on their students and how much of an impossible task has been asked of you all during such a crazy and sometimes volatile time. I've seen my own my son's teachers burst into tears on occasion when she simply could not connect with the faces lost on her own tiny screen. How could you have all found ways to deal with this for an entire day to keep kids entertained is simply beyond me. Since Outside Insights released last year, I've had the honor of reading it to many classrooms online. The experience has been unlike any other I've received. I hadn't realized that the book, meant to be a time capsule, was also a way to open discussions with kids about their unique time of isolation. Kids volunteered stories of what they did during lockdown, crowding around the tiny camera with their masks covering their faces. Some kids told lovely stories about staying at home and playing board games and baking cookies. Some kids told stories that were heartbreaking. There was one young boy in a class who, after raising his hand to ask a question, proceeded to tell me about his dog, Buster. He went on describing how good of a dog he was and how he played with him during COVID when he couldn't go to his friend's house. The teacher was on the point of having the little boy sit down, thinking he'd never ask his question, when the boy abruptly ended his story with, "And then Buster died of COVID." I could see the teacher audibly gasp, so caught off guard was she. I was caught too, skipping a heartbeat at his solemn little face. "I miss him," was how he finished. And then, unprompted, he left the camera and returned to his seat. I could see the teacher dabbing her eyes while trying to regain her composure. And it was then that I realized remembering is a part of healing. I've seen, as I've read the book in nearly every Zoom class, there's always a teacher or librarian who at some point in the book begins to cry. It's never a child, but always a teacher or librarian, because we forget in our rush to make sure our children are okay, that we haven't checked if we are okay. Teachers have been asked to recover in real time, and then have been asked to be there to take care of our children while the parents go back to work. No part of this has been easy for anyone, but for the most part, and with very few exceptions, you teachers have managed this semi-return to life with grace and true compassion. You're doing more than simply educating our children. You're filling in those gaps left behind in our children's lives, both in their education and their emotional growth. You're helping them to heal, all while healing yourselves. And that is the thought that quells the anxiety I mentioned earlier. When I think back to my young self and picture myself in such a vulnerable place, I know with certainty that somehow one of my teachers would have found me, would have sent me books, and would have helped me to pull out of it. And in case no one has said it to you, and it can't ever really be said enough, thank you. Thank you so much for being there for our children. This was supposed to be a speech about picture books, so I'll bring it back to that now. To finish up, I'll tell you one last memory about one more of my books. Last year, I was given the honor of my life when my book, Bear Came Along, When the Kelda Got. This was the manuscript that as soon as I got it, I knew what it would look like. It was one of the shortest, simplest scripts I'd ever seen, but it was fully formed and fully fleshed in detail in my head as I read the words. This was one of those stories, those simple truth stories, the ones that you understand as a child and ache for as an adult. It was an antidote to the real world, at least an antidote for me as an adult. It was a chance for me to create images that heal, that are kind and lovely and fill you with joy and comfort. But for children who haven't formed their opinions of the world yet, it gave advice on how to live in this world. We're in this together. We're individuals, but we're part of a whole. We sink or swim together, and sometimes just love together. That's what a picture book should do. It doesn't tell you what's wrong with the world. It tells you what the world can be. Because you see, the magic for people who create picture books, the reason we love it is because we get kids first. We get the first shot at imprinting children with empathy and kindness, uniting over dividing, striving to do better than to slide towards the worst. Our responsibility is in returning not to the idea of existing within a boundary, but in establishing a moral code in a compelling way in spite of those boundaries. A story can satisfy every sensitivity reader out there and not manage to offend anyone, but that doesn't make it a good story. Our goal should still be to inspire. When you see a book on a child's lap and they're quietly reading that book or looking at their pictures, nothing fills you with a greater sense of accomplishment and meaning than realizing that you're making an imprint in that kid's development. That kid isn't aware of the hurdles the creator had to go through, doesn't care if the book has been banned or deemed morally unfit, or has gone through the rigors of being reviewed for any offensive material or any other artificial concern. She's only looking at a book, a story that we hope speaks to her in some way. A book is the closest you can come to reaching a child, embracing a child with your words and pictures, of whispering in that child's ear, "You're here, you're all right, you're safe in these pages. Sit back, relax. Let me tell you a story." Thank you.
Thank you, LeUyen. I needed a minute to deal with my own tears. I'm regaining my own composure. Thank you so much for this beautiful gift that you gave us, the way that you kicked off our day. What I love so much about your keynote this morning is what I love about your work, that you shine a light back to us in the world and kids' experiences, the way that it is, all what's beautiful and hard and ugly and amazing. It's what I love about Outside Inside. Many of us were tweeting and messaging of like, she's reading it and I'm crying. And I was. Thank you. Thank you for the gifts that you've given to my family specifically in building readers and what you give to all readers. Thank you for starting the day in such a gorgeous way. I really appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm going to go recover now and drink some coffee.
Sure. Yeah, you turn off, and as soon as I turn off, I'm going to do the same. Thank you so much. If you felt inspired by this morning, which clearly we all did, first of all, you likely already have, but LeUyen is the author illustrator of over 100 books for children, millions of copies in print. You can learn more about her work from her website, LeUyenPham.com, or you can find her on Instagram, Win, Lose, or Draw. You also can contact her from her website to reach out and just tell her how much this morning meant to you, or many other ways that you might like to connect. Also, as we said this morning, if you felt inspired, this day is a free day. You're just tuning in because you tuned in because you wanted to, or you just saw the link on YouTube or something. You're watching along with us. If you felt inspired, like I did this morning, and I plan to do this right after this keynote, please go to Plan International. It is the charity that LeUyen adopted for us this morning. If you click on the charity link on the top of our page, or use that website right there, gathering.theeducatorcollaborative.com/charity, you can read a little bit about why she chose this organization. So please, please pay the joy forward. Also, just a big hello to folks from around the world. Here's some of the many countries that are tuning in this morning. Hi, United States, Mexico, Canada, Mozambique, Hong Kong, United Kingdom, Singapore. The list goes on. You can see it on your screen. Hi to all of you. Thank you for joining in this amazing keynote this morning, and we hope you enjoy your day together. All of our adopted charities across the entire day are continually on our website. Any session like this morning's that moves you, that inspires you, or helps to improve your practice, please consider paying the joy forward. Coming up in our first session, there are 4 different workshops to choose from: poetry and picture books that illuminate the beauty and brilliance of children, A Poet Rests and Wait, Freeing the Writing Within, Rethinking Reading Strategies, and Empowering Student Activists. The great thing about today is all of these sessions will be presented live all at the same time. You'll just click over to the workshop you'd like to watch. But after that, they'll be available on our website until the next gathering that happens in September. So these are all 4 I want to see. So you could watch one now and then watch another one later, another one later, another one. They'll be there for you. If you love learning this morning, if you feel inspired, we encourage you to please use the hashtag #TheEdClubGathering. Remember the at the start. You can always tag us at the Ed Collab, but certainly please do tag your presenters. Let them know how meaningful different sessions were to you. Thank you, LeUyen. Thank you, Jessica, who is behind the scenes here helping us with tech. And thanks to all of you for joining in today. Please enjoy the rest of the Ed Collab gathering. And thank you for all that you do for your students, for your colleagues, and for our amazing profession. Have a great day, everyone.